The recollection of forms of spirit in James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. Reached the conclusion now, although the conclusion will actually be spread over 2 videos. Now my memory inspired, turn the wheel again. Forget not the feld. But lo, boys, lo, he rises shivering with these pitiful eyes, and his woes become voice. Eptha Sisamis. Examine of conscience scruples. Now he to the best of his memory Shamado. Given the Finnegans Wake reference there, if you want to look it up. And here is a quote from the Phenomenology of Spirit. Language is the existence of spirit as an immediate self. Our revels now are ending. You'll know where that comes from, I presume, that I'll be telling you. I'm just emphasizing the point that this is the conclusion, and we're going to be focusing on language, as we have done already, really, but I mean in a particular way. And here is from the ballad from which Finnegans Wake was based. Wackfall the da, now dance to your partner. Wilt the floor your trotter shake? Wasn't it the truth, I tell you? Lots of fun at Finnegans Wake. So, the development of forms of spirit in the phenomenology may be likened to a Bacchanalian festivity, or indeed an Irish wake, a grand carousal in which every reveller is in a dizzying state of intoxication, and yet there is a kind of harmony to the whole. A loss of poise and balance between opposing forces is the very thing that impels dialectic forward, and yet for one who looks on from a standpoint of privilege, they can observe all of it in its totality and come to understand it as a sort of steady, orderly progression that reflects an image, albeit somewhat distorted, or what is transpiring in history. It is the business of philosophy to be concerned with the necessary and the essential. So I have the relevant passage there from the phenomenology. Philosophy has to do not with the unessential in determinations, but with a determination insofar as it is essential. Its element and content is not the abstract or non-actual, but the actual, that which posits itself and is alive within itself. The evanescent itself must be regarded as essential, not as something fixed, cut off from the true, and left lying who knows where outside it, any more than the true is to be regarded as something on the other side, positive and dead. Appearance is the arising and passing away that does not itself arise and pass away, and constitutes the actuality and the movement of the life of truth. The true is thus the Bacchanalian revel in which no member is not drunk, yet because each member collapses as soon as he drops out, the revel is just as much transparent and simple repose. In the whole of the movement, seen as a state of repose, what distinguishes itself therein and gives itself particular existence, is preserved as something that recollects itself, whose existence is self-knowledge. Which is to say, philosophy is concerned with the necessary and the essential, that is, with what is actual, and being actual is the ability to become manifest and join in the party, so to speak. Furthermore, that's the Bacchanalian revelry. Furthermore, one way to comprehend and to make sense of what is actually essential is to extract away from the concrete, from experience, so that it can be asserted of experiences that in this one respect, at the very least, they are all on an equal footing. And yet, once the abstracting is done, that which remains is something that is non-actual. But how are we to understand the non-actual? A thing that exists solely for the mind, or what is essential in some respect, what becomes actual, what has to be brought from mere abstraction to a state of actuality, to actual existence in concrete forms, in persons and in cultures over time. A question of particular import is whether attention should be paid to the eternal, which is precisely where a good deal of philosophical attention has been directed. And I give the quote there from Spinoza's Ethics, where he expresses this thought. It is the nature of reason to perceive things under a certain form of eternity. Sub quantum aeternatus specie. Well, my Latin is not very good, in fact non-existent. I apologise, Sean began, but I would rather Spinoza. The reference to Spinoza there in the Wake. Attention should be paid to the eternal, which precisely where a good deal of philosophical attention has been directed, or to the evanescent. The evanescent, Hegel does say elsewhere that the evanescence itself must also be regarded as essential, which I should have put that quote up there really because it's important. Anyway, that which rises to the surface exists for a moment and is gone. Like brine shrimps, this is just my example by the way, I don't know why I thought of brine shrimps, bored for a day, mating and expiring, but the brine shrimp species continues. During the Bacchanalian revelry, some leave the party, others join in, and the party continues. In terms of the truth of appearance, something comes upon the scene, develops, and is shown to be inadequate. Considered from the point of view of just one individual, the single forms of spirit do not persist any more than determinate thoughts do, like ephemeral thoughts that the stream of conscious narrative technique aims to capture. But there are necessary movements preserved as something that recollects itself, that remembers this entire process. Appearances can be perceived, as can the potential working itself into the actual, as can the manner through which it manifests itself as possessing yet more potentiality that has not been actualized and that works itself out over and over again. What there is in the past begins its retreat and allows something else to advance and new changes ensue. Existence is self-knowledge, which is more of a theoretical perspective than an active perspective that is occurring in history, for the vantage point must of necessity be one whereby a spirit itself apprehends that it is at this point that it has the responsibility of looking back at all the developments of history and recognizing what has occurred, recollecting them as much as it is able, maybe through imagination or emotion or some kind of appreciation, and then conceptualizing it. One can neither be a purely passive consumer of the phenomenology or of the wake. One must wholeheartedly join in the party. Such a process is represented by Anna Livia's, this is in the wake obviously, own self-positing and final act of recollection. Very late into the night, HCP, that's Humphrey, and Anna Livia are aroused from their sleep by a cry from their son, Shem, and upstairs they go to give him comfort, after which they return to their bed, where they endeavour to engage in sexual intercourse before falling asleep again, having been interrupted in the act by the crow of a cock. Oh yes, oh yes. Withdraw your member. Closure. The chamber stands adjourned. That chamber is their bedroom. Such precedent is largely a cause to lack of collective continences among Donnelly's orchard, as lifelong the shady side to fair brothers Field, Humbo, lock your keckle up. Keckle's the vagina. Lock your keckle up, Annie. Blow your wickle out. Wickle is the penis. Tuck away the table sheet. You never wet the tea. That means, well, the tea is ready as a euphemism for sexual intercourse. Not having wet the tea, Humphrey obviously never achieved the desired climax. And may you go right away back to your antediluvian, Humphrey, after that. Their actual goings on in the bedroom are actually witnessed by the four apostles who reappear in various guises: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, representing the four walls of the bedroom, the four posts of the bed, judges and jurymen. They watch powerlessly and endlessly the goings-on of the ever-shifting figures that occupy the space between them. Lock your keckle, blow your wickle out. Having never wet the tea, the chamber stands adjourned. During all of this time, a dramatic mime is playing itself out with guilt, the fall and rebirth as its central themes. There is therefore the inevitable judging. So that passage there from the Wake is taken from Mark's passage, which is described as the second position of discordance, which covers, among other things, the episode whereupon Humphrey disgraced himself. Mark, as judge, is adjudicating, as in a trial, upon the present activities of Humphrey and Olivia, and I quote now from the Wake: she, but on what do you again leer? I am not leering, I beg your pardons. I am highly serious. Guilt, of course. Yes, highly serious. Mark insists he is not leering, but is highly serious. But for Joyce, the compatibility of incompatibilities was most assuredly compatible. The spirit of the philosopher Giordano Bruno is here felt, his motto being in Trista Hilaris, Hilarat Trista. Cheerful in gloom, gloomy in cheer, breathes through the narrative. Guilt, of course, depends upon a general concurrence with regard to a set of assumptions situated within a series of historical episodes, a communal sense of being bound by a notion of individuals governed by conscience, the first model of which is that of beautiful souls, valorizing a certain type of untaintedness. Now, the beautiful soul, that's from the phenomenology, discussing conscience. The beautiful soul, evil and its forgiveness. The beautiful soul projects its own disorder onto the world and attempts to heal the disorder by imposing the law of the heart, a principle that was supposed to motivate consciousness into acting for the good of humanity, and turns out to be both perverting and perverted upon everyone else. Immaculate contraceptives for the populace, as it says in the Wake. Now, beautiful souls. And Olivia is indeed wrestling with forms of spirit, the like of which are so near to our own age, and tied to diverse types of fantasies about how the life of a one bound by conscience ought to be sustained. And it is but a fantasy, as the presence of the judges in the Wake effectively demonstrates. A fantasy of a disavowal of individuality, out of which emerges two forms of moral spirit, that of an acting consciousness, the beautiful soul, and that of a judging consciousness. And Olivia triumphs over both notions of moral untaintedness. Two differing forms of spirit clash, from which emerges a misunderstanding of what spirit is on the part of the judging consciousness, while the confession consciousness takes on board the judgment made by the judging consciousness. For a self-consciousness exists only in relation to another self-consciousness, and if the judge hardens his heart, I am alluding here to a passage in the Phenomenology, the allegory of the penitent confessing his transgressions to the hard-hearted, unforgiving judge. The judging consciousness refuses to acknowledge that he is not wholly self-determined, that is in fact spirit in the absolute certainty of itself, is lord and master over every deed and actuality, and can cast them off and make them as if they never happened. Spirit is master over deeds and actuality insofar as spirit provides the social norms, context and determinate concepts and commitments that make deeds and actuality meaningful. To begin with, the judging consciousness refuses to admit this, and instead holds steady to the delusional notion that it can be either a pure being or an empty nothingness. So for self-consciousness exists only in relation to another self-consciousness, and if the judge hardens his heart, and the confessor is thereby an iniquitous one, the one that acts upon the basis of motives and intentions that the judge deems to be selfish, a disconnectedness then emerges within the action itself, as the confessor accepts his or her guilt and responsibility and agrees with the judge. A possibility of response then opens up on the other side for some kind of reciprocity, which is to say there is an expectation on the part of the acting consciousness, the confessor. However, as well, I'm getting to one of the most famous quotes of Hegel's there. Yes, however, such attitudinizing is governed by norms themselves instituted through engagement with a special kind of process, namely recollection. An expressively progressive course, through the prior applications of a notion, is picked out by the process of retrospectively, rationally, and imaginatively reconstructing these applications, and that is recollection. This rational and imaginative reconstruction assumes the form of a gradual emergence into explicitness of a determinate conceptual content that provides the norm governing applications of that concept. That content is then exhibited as having been implicit all along. This process of recollection assumes in essence a retrospective perspective. So here we go, a retrospective perspective. When philosophy paints its grey in grey, the shape of life has grown old, and it cannot be rejuvenated but only recognized by the grey in grey of philosophy. The owl of Minerva begins its flight only with the onset of dusk. The process of recollection assumes in essence a retrospective perspective. A process that transforms a mere past into history, a past comprehended as its reasons march through history. The term recollection appears in the final section of the Phenomenology at one point in hyphenated form, in the German that is, Erinnerung. There's an ER, then a hyphen, then Innerung. For recollection is the going within of the subject. It is really an innering. So we're sort of playing about with the German language there. Spirit recollects its own development by spirit itself. Spirit goes within itself, recollecting itself, scripting its memoirs, not in the sense of a little history, but of a natural history of its realizations. And through the divine nature of language, which Hegel talks about in the Phenomenology, if I want to help out language, which has the divine nature of directly reversing the meaning of what is said, of making it into something else, and thus not letting what is meant get into words at all, experiences teaches me that what the truth of said certainty in fact is, I point it out as a here, which is a here of other heres, or is in its own self a simple togetherness of many heres, which is to say it is a universal. Through the divine nature of language, its power is to take thought to the universal. The embodiment of rationality in regard to this power for any language is implicitly a logic, and hence a metaphysics. Which is something to bear in mind. Anyone who prefers Hegel, shorn of his metaphysics. Language is implicitly a logic, and hence a metaphysics. For a form of spirit that has not here been discussed explicitly, but that informs all forms of spirit, is language itself, with its power to grasp the actual in thought, to form it as the notion. To be continued. One more video to go to do it. Thank you for your time.